Okay, so let's start our final unit on the film Full Metal Jacket by the director Stanley Kubrick. Just before we start talking about the film, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that you can access this film for free if you log in to the U of R library website. You log in and then you go, you can do a search for Criterion on Demand. And that's a database that once you sign in, you can access all their list of films. And Full Metal Jacket is available for free to download or stream. You have to have the Silverlight player, so it might ask you to download that program. And I had a little trouble running it the first time. I had to go through my Firefox browser, not my Chrome browser, to get it to work. So you might have to sort of switch browsers or restart your computer to run Silverlight, but it should work eventually. And you should have access to the film either by streaming it or downloading it. Unfortunately, it's not on Netflix. I checked, but there's no reason for you to, have to buy the DVD. You should be able to find it for free on the university homepage through the library. So, Criterion on Demand is what it's called. I'll just write that down here for you. So Criterion. Okay, so that is where you have to go to find the film. So University of Regina Library Database, Criterion on Demand, and then once you log in, you should be able to access the film. Okay. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me or contact the library as well. Okay, so let's move on to our discussion of our unit for Full Metal Jacket. So the film is directed by Stanley Kubrick, and you've probably seen or have heard of the films by this director. He's very influential. Unfortunately, he's no longer alive, but his sort of filmography is, very much, it has a huge impact on American culture and American cinema. So you've probably heard of The Shining, which is one of his films, one of my favorite films too. Very scary horror movie. He also did A Clockwork Orange, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and a whole bunch of other films that are, have had a major impact in film studies. And he's known for his sort of innovative sort of cinematography. The way his films look is very sort of distinct. And he uses, things like his color palette or his sort of wide, long screenshots, this sort of use of repetition and patterns, all that kind of stuff really sort of accentuates the ideas behind his films. And in this film, he's dealing with war as his subject matter, but he's, also dealt with ideas of, mental illness, horror and, human evils, the destructive nature of humans, and, a lot of sort of themes that he touches on are also prevalent in this film. And this film is based off of a novel by Gustav Hasford, who wrote The Short Timers, and Full Metal Jacket is sort of an adaptation of that novel. But it's been adapted, so when a film adapts a book, it often, changes it a little bit, and there's the film has sort of two distinct halves to it. The first half takes place during the basic training of the Marine Corps And then the second half of the film takes place in Vietnam during the combat service. So those two distinct halves are sort of distinct to the film. And we'll talk a little bit more about those two sort of halves of the movie in a moment. But, you can just think about, pay attention while you're watching the film to some of the stylistic elements that Stanley Kubrick uses to accentuate the characters and the themes. So he'll use music almost ironically or in places where, it doesn't seem appropriate, or, the music will be so upbeat and then the subject matter will be so sort of depressing or disturbing. And he sort of is using a lot of dark humor or satire and kind of abstract qualities to represent war. And this question of military masculinity will be, at the forefront of the film as well. So we'll see that emphasized with even the opening scene where we have men's heads being shaved as the new recruits join in to or get ready for their basic training, and this music playing in the background. So just pay attention to those little details, the sound, the sight, the sort of way he captures image on film. So I don't expect you to, do a film study of this film, but as if you were, scholars of film. But I do want you to sort of try to pay attention to the visual components as well as paying attention to the dialogue and the characters. So all that kind of stuff that we would normally analyze in literature. So you can pay attention to, visual components as well. So it's a large part, obviously, of studying a film. So there are some themes that we can sort of think about while we're watching the movie. And these are sort of themes that are prominent and relate to some of the topics of this course. So the first one that I want us to think about is this idea of military indoctrination, or the sort of military institute. So if you think about military indoctrination, it is sort of that process of being socialized into a social order, a military social order. So it's all of those lessons that are learned by the young men who are recruited into the military, and what they learn. So that's the process of indoctrination. So they learn certain rules, certain, worldviews, a kind of mentality almost that the basic training kind of instills in these young men and really kind of ingrains in their mind. So it's sort of shaping the young men's bodies and minds through this basic training. So we see that in the first part of the film. So all of part one will take place during the basic training of the soldiers prior to them being sent overseas to Vietnam. So the military indoctrination will really sort of push this idea that these young men are no longer just civilians, they're becoming killing machines, right? So that's what the military Marine Corps wants to teach these young men to become basically killing machines, right? So they lose their humanity and become warriors who are, determined to kill and not think twice about it. So that's sort of what they're being indoctrinated into, this kind of warrior, very violent form of masculinity. So that's our basic indoctrination theme. And then associated with that would be this idea of military masculinity. We've been talking about this sort of again and again but it is a kind of patriarchal masculinity or violent masculinity that is being taught to these young men, and it's very much related to, you know, violence, aggression, dominance, power, and you know, asserting oneself through violence. So that is where we get that warrior mentality as well. So it's teaching men, young men, to in order to perform their masculinity or to be men, they have to master violence. So they have to become violent and wield their weapon, and sort of not think twice about killing. So all of that has to do with a kind of masculinity that's taught to these young men. And it's also, at the same time, it's going to degrade women. So the theme of sort of misogyny will also be part of that, right? So the hatred or mistreatment of women. And we'll see that throughout the film, as there's a lot of sort of use of prostitutes and degradation of women, and the association of women with kind of weakness, or labeling women as kind of passive, weak, insubordinate, or degraded objects, in contrast with the soldiers, the male soldiers. So we'll see that as part of this gender identity as well. So the film takes kind of a satirical or critical view of the military, and this idea of unraveling of patriarchy will become important too. So the film sort of builds up the men and their masculinity, and shows how sort of powerful, but they also shows how there's kind of a crisis or unraveling of that sense of gender identity as well. So patriarchy or male dominance is kind of undermined or critiqued or unraveled throughout the film. So we see how men fail to meet the expectations of masculinity, or how patriarchy, male dominance, sort of falls apart when faced with the reality, the real threats posed by the Vietnam War situation. And we'll see how, you know, male dominance goes under crisis when faced with, you know, certain circumstances. So that'll be part of Kubrick's kind of critique of military masculinity in the film. And that's also kind of relates to this idea of dehumanization. So there's a lot of examples of how, well, first it's the sort of the soldiers themselves that become dehumanized as they become indoctrinated into the system. They become almost, like I use the term, killing machines. They become kind of tools or weapons used by to sort of support the system of the military. So in that sense, they lose their kind of individuality when they become part of this military system. They lose their sense of self and become just, you know, weapons of war. So that could be a form of dehumanization. Another form would be how the soldiers then end up dehumanizing the so-called enemy. They treat the Vietnamese people as less than human. There's examples of a lot of sort of inhumane violence in their treatment of Vietnamese civilians, and we'll see how they use, you know, racial slurs, and really that idea of racial othering and dehumanization will become a part of Kubrick's critique of that kind of American involvement in Vietnam as well. So that's another aspect that we can look at. And then I didn't mention that here, but you know, psychological trauma is also a theme, especially in part one, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So the character of Leonard Lawrence and Joker, who is our narrator, will also experience a kind of traumatic breakdown